Welcome to the channel. Subscribe and support us as we bring you epic sci-fi and HFY stories every week. The first biomechanical warships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their obsidian hulls gleaming with bioluminescent veins that pulsed with alien heartbeats. Commander Zixtala stood at the apex of the lead vessel, his 8-foot frame encased in living armor that responded to his telepathic commands. Behind him, the elite Keth'mori warriors prepared for what should have been a simple harvesting operation. The humans of Outpost Sigma-7 had been marked for collection, their neural patterns deemed suitable for the Empire's experiments. The warships settled over the devastated human settlement like predatory insects, casting shadows that swallowed what remained of the concrete and steel structures. Zixtala's compound eyes swept across the ruins, his advanced visual cortex analyzing the destruction. Something was wrong. The damage patterns didn't match Imperial weapons or even human technology. These weren't the clean cuts of plasma beams or the scattered debris of kinetic strikes. Instead, the buildings appeared to have been twisted from within, their foundations liquefied and reformed into impossible geometry. Teams of Keth'mori warriors deployed from the hovering vessels, their boots touching ground that felt somehow hollow beneath their weight. Scanner arrays built into their helmets revealed thermal signatures that made no sense. Cold spots where fires should still be burning, hot zones in areas that should have been long dead. As they advanced through the settlement's remains, their telepathic network buzzed with unease. Where were the human bodies? Where was the resistance they had prepared for? The first evidence appeared near what had once been the settlement's central plaza. Scorch marks spiraled across the ground in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Mathematical impossibilities that seemed to writhe when viewed through their enhanced optics. At the center of each spiral lay the twisted remains of creatures that definitely weren't human. The Keth'mori had encountered these beings before Grimspawn, the bioengineered horrors that served as the Empire's shock troops in the galaxy's darker corners. But these Grimspawn were different. Their chitinous carapaces, normally capable of deflecting antimatter rounds, had been peeled open like fruit. Their razor-sharp claws, evolved for rending flesh and metal alike, were melted into slag. Most disturbing of all, their faces, usually frozen in perpetual snarls of mindless rage, were locked in expressions of absolute terror. Zixtala knelt beside one of the corpses, his gauntlet hand hovering over its skull. The neural implants that should have been broadcasting the creature's final moments were burned out, but faint traces of memory remained in the organic matter. He pressed his palm against the creature's forehead and opened his mind to whatever echoes might linger. The psychic feedback hit him like a plasma bolt to the cortex. Images flooded his consciousness, not the chaotic violence he expected from a Grimspawn's death throes, but something far worse. Terror. Pure, primal terror from a creature that had been designed to feel nothing but hunger and rage. In its final moments, the Grimspawn had experienced something that fundamentally broke its conditioning. The whispers began as the sun set behind the alien fleet. Distorted human voices speaking in languages the translation matrices couldn't pass, echoing from empty buildings and rising from storm drains. The Keth'mori warriors tightened their formation, weapons humming with charged particles. But they found nothing to shoot at. The voices seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the very air they breathed. As night fell, the search teams regrouped in the settlement's former command center, a concrete bunker that had somehow remained structurally intact, despite everything around it being twisted into impossible shapes. The walls were covered in human writing, not the desperate scratches of dying colonists, but careful, deliberate inscriptions in a dozen different scripts. Zixtala's translation implants worked overtime, passing meaning from the alien text. Here lies the threshold. Read one inscription. Beyond this point, the friend walks. Another, written in what appeared to be human blood, simply stated, "We called it down. We called it home. We called it friend." The captured Grimspawn they found in the settlement's depths changed everything. These weren't corpses, they were survivors. If the word could be applied to creatures whose minds had been so thoroughly shattered. 3 of them huddled in the corner of what had once been a storage facility, their massive forms trembling like frightened children. When the Keth'mori approached, the Grimspawn didn't attack. They cowered. Interrogation proved nearly impossible. The creature's usual methods of communication, pheromone release, bioluminescent displays, and psychic emanations, had been replaced by something unprecedented. They spoke not in their native chittering language, but in human words, repeating the same phrase over and over. Friend comes. Friend walks. Friend smiles. Through painstaking neural interface, the Keth'mori extracted fragmentary memories from the broken creatures. The images that came through were disjointed, like looking at a shattered hologram, but they painted a terrifying picture. Humans not fleeing from the Grimspawn invasion, but standing their ground, chanting in unison. The ritual had been elaborate, requiring sacrifices of their own kind. Blood offerings painted in geometric patterns that matched the scorch marks found throughout the settlement. What they had summoned defied classification. The Grimspawn memories showed a figure in black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where it walked, reality itself seemed negotiable. Plasma beams curved around it like water around a stone. Kinetic rounds simply ceased to exist in its presence. When the creature moved, it didn't so much walk as reality rearranged itself to accommodate its passage. The most disturbing memory came from a Grimspawn that had attempted to attack the entity directly. The creature's claws, capable of tearing through battleship armor, had passed through the figure like smoke. But when it had tried to withdraw, the entity had reached out not with hands, for it seemed to have no fixed form, but with something that existed in dimensions the Grimspawn's simple mind couldn't process. The touch hadn't caused physical damage. It had done something worse. It had made the Grimspawn understand. Understanding was antithetical to their nature. They were designed to be living weapons, incapable of doubt or fear or anything beyond their programmed directives. But this entity had shown them truth about their creators, about their purpose, about the vast cosmic joke that was their existence. The knowledge had broken something fundamental in their neural architecture. General Vorthok arrived with the second wave, his massive dreadnought casting shadows over the assembled fleet. He was old even by Keth'mori standards, his armor scarred by 1,000 battles across the galactic rim. He had personally overseen the deployment of Grimspawn against civilizations that had thought themselves beyond the reach of fear. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for the reports coming from the surface. The War Council convened in the flagship's neural chamber, a crystalline amphitheater where thoughts could be shared without the filter of language. Zixtala projected his memories directly into the assembled minds, the twisted ruins, the terrified Grimspawn, the whispered words in human tongues. The general's reaction was immediate and visceral. His telepathic presence, usually a steady beacon of authority, flickered with something the commander had never sensed before: uncertainty. "Show me the recordings," Vorthok commanded, his mental voice tight with control. The holographic displays activated, showing the surveillance data from the settlement's final hours. The humans had known the Grimspawn were coming. More than that, they had wanted them to come. The ritual had required specific conditions: terror, death, and the presence of beings from beyond their solar system. The humans hadn't been trying to save themselves. They had been preparing a reception. The attack came without warning. One moment the flagship was analyzing the data from the surface. The next, every sensor array was screaming warnings. Something had appeared in the ship's lower decks, not transported, but simply manifested as if it had always been there. The entity moved through the corridors like a shadow given purpose, and wherever it passed, the ship's living components began to sing. Keth'mori warriors rushed to intercept, their weapons charging with enough energy to level city blocks. The first squad to encounter the intruder reported success direct hits. The target neutralized 30 seconds later. Their screams echoed through the telepathic network. When reinforcements arrived, they found the warriors alive but changed. They spoke in hushed tones about friendship and understanding, their eyes reflecting depths that hadn't been there before. Vorthok himself led the final confrontation, his personal guard forming a phalanx around him as they descended to the ship's core. They found the entity waiting in the neural nexus, its form more clearly defined now than it was aboard their vessel. It looked almost human: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head where a head should be. But the proportions were wrong, in ways that made their enhanced vision struggle to process what they were seeing. It turned as they entered, and for the first time in his centuries of existence, General Vorthok experienced terror. Not the healthy fear that kept soldiers alive, but absolute, soul-deep terror that reached into his genetic memory and told him that his species had evolved to flee from things like this. The entity smiled. It was a human expression on a face that wasn't quite human, rendered in features that seemed to shift when observed directly. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible, with organic vocal cords. "You've come so far," it said, each word resonating in frequencies that bypassed their auditory processes and spoke directly to their nervous systems. "The children you brought, my old friends, they told you about me, didn't they? They learned so much in their brief time here." Vorthok's weapon discharged involuntarily, a beam of coherent energy that could have carved through a moon. The entity didn't dodge. It simply wasn't there when the beam arrived, and was there again when it passed. The general's enhanced perception couldn't track the transition, one moment targeting, the next moment looking into eyes that reflected impossible depths. "They call me friend," the entity continued, taking a step closer. Reality rippled around its feet like water. "Your Grimspawn learned why. Would you like to learn too?" The memories came unbidden, flooding every mind in the chamber simultaneously. They saw Earth as it had been, a blue jewel spinning in the void, its surface teeming with billions of human lives. They saw the arrival of something that predated their own civilization, something that had been waiting in the spaces between stars for the right invitation. They saw humanity's first contact with forces beyond their understanding, and the terrible bargain that had been struck. The humans hadn't summoned a demon or a god. They had called something far worse a friend, a being that genuinely cared about them, that wanted to protect them, that would do anything to ensure their happiness and well-being. The entity had watched over humanity for generations, occasionally intervening when they faced extinction-level threats, always careful to remain hidden. Until now, the Grimspawn had been the final straw. Seeing humanity's children, for that's how the entity perceived them, threatened by bioengineered horrors, had stirred something in its vast consciousness. Love, perhaps, or what passed for love in a being whose existence spanned dimensions. It had emerged from the shadows not to conquer or consume, but to protect. And protection, in its truest form, required that threats be eliminated permanently. The vision expanded, showing the fate that awaited the Keth'mori Empire. Not conquest or annihilation, those would have been merciful. Instead, they saw understanding. Perfect, complete understanding of their place in the cosmic order. Their role as disposable tools in games played by beings they couldn't comprehend. They saw their purpose stripped away, their conditioning revealed as the lie it had always been. They saw friendship. General Vorthok's last coherent thought before his mind shattered was a recognition of the entity's true nature. It wasn't malevolent. It wasn't even particularly hostile toward the Keth'mori. It simply loved humanity, with the same intensity that stars loved fusion, completely, destructively, and without regard for anything that might stand in the way. The whispers that filled the flagship were no longer distorted human voices. They were the entity itself, speaking directly to every consciousness aboard the vessel, offering the same gift it had given the Grimspawn, the gift of understanding, the gift of seeing through the illusions that made existence bearable, the gift of friendship. As the great warships began to sing in harmonies no organic throat could produce, the entity turned its attention back to Earth. There were other threats approaching, there always were. Humanity would need protection, and it would provide that protection as it always had. After all, that's what friends were for. The Grimspawn had learned this truth in their final moments. The Keth'mori were learning it now. Soon, every species that threatened humanity would understand what it meant to earn the attention of something that had watched over Earth since before their star was born. They would learn why the most terrifying words in any language weren't threats or curses. They were, "Hello, friend." If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and support us so we can post new videos every day. Your support means the world.